Today I'm going to be talking about this, the Wandrd Prvke Lite, which I've now been using for the last few months or so. Now, this is by no means the perfect camera bag, nor am I going to hail it as the best bag ever. But for me personally, from at least a size and weight point of view, it's probably my Goldilocks bag, and it's quickly becoming my go-to camera backpack. And so in this video, I'm going to be talking about why that is, why I wanted this bag in the first place, what I think about it, how it compares to some of my other bags, how I use it, and what I can fit into it. I'll also be demonstrating some different camera loadouts using my Canon R System, as well as touching briefly on some of the differences with the Prvke 21. Okay, so this looks as if it's going to be a longish video, so please accept my apologies. But hopefully you'll find something of use here, as I'll be covering some points that other reviewers don't seem to mention. So if any of this interests you, then please make yourself comfortable and stick around. Now then, good to be with you all again. The Wandrd Prvke Lite, with a storage capacity of 11 litres, expandable by means of its roll top to 16 litres and weighing in at just 1.1 kilos, is the smallest, lightest backpack within the Prvke range, the others being the 21, 31 and 41 litre bags. But it's very much a cut down version of those bags, and I don't mean just on its size. It misses out on some key features whilst at the same time gaining a couple of features of its own. And whilst it shares the same basic overall aesthetic design as its bigger siblings, it's very much a minimalist bag, a bag more suited for those occasions when you want to travel lighter. So, first things first, what particularly attracted me to this bag? Well, quite simply, I wanted a smaller, lighter backpack. I was after a bag that ideally was no heavier than 1.5 kilos, that could be used for both landscape and urban shoots as well as for travel. My main landscape backpack for the last few years has been the Shimoda Action X50, the original one, which I also reviewed about 4 years ago. And it's still a great bag. It's a very comfortable bag. You see, I don't always need nor want to carry as much gear as the Shimoda can accommodate. And even without any gear in it, with just the 2 camera cubes that I use, the bag weighs in at 2.8 kilos or thereabouts. And as I said, the Prvke Lite by contrast weighs just 1.1 kilos. Another attraction of the Lite is that it's not only airline carry-on compliant, but with the roll top cinched right down, I've measured the height of the bag at just 39 centimeters, which makes it even potentially acceptable by some airlines as a personal item. Other attractions for me, as well as the expandable roll top, were the side access plus rear access, and the fact that you can gain access to the roll top section from the rear of the main section of the bag, a feature which is sorely lacking on the Shimoda bag. So let's talk in a little bit more detail about the bag. Now, even though the Lite is the smallest bag within the Prvke backpack range, it's not the cheapest. That honour goes to the larger 21 litre bag. However, the 21 litre, as with the other larger bags, requires a separate camera cube, whereas the Lite has camera storage built in. And after adding the essential camera cube to the 21, it comes out at just under £40 more expensive than the Lite. So, what features does the Lite miss out on compared to the 21? Well, these mainly centre around external storage compartments. On the base of the bag, the Lite misses out on a zipped compartment that would be useful for storing an optional protective outer cover for the bag. Whilst on each side, the Lite also misses out on zipped compartments positioned towards the top of the larger bags, missing out also on the internal key tether on one of them. But for me, perhaps the most annoying thing is the absence of the hidden compartment that is normally found behind the luggage pass-through strap on the bigger bags, which is touted for the larger bags as a useful location for storing such things as your passport whilst travelling. You do still get the luggage pass-through strap, however, which is nicely placed in the lower third of the back panel, which means that it will also fit over shorter handled cases. You also still get the weather sealed zip compartment at the top of the bag, which is fleece lined and which can take a plus size smartphone and, thankfully, a passport. And you also still get the full length zip compartment, again weather sealed, at the front of the bag, which many reviewers claim is suitable only for carrying a notebook or other documents. Now, given that this compartment occupies the full front of the bag, it would be sheer overkill if this was indeed all that you could carry. Thankfully, that's not the case. I often have in here my larger platypod as well as my hat and gloves as needed. I've also used it for a rain cover for the bag plus a hiking seat cushion. Alternatively, I can fit a lightweight windproof outer jacket or even a thin fleece in here. But for external storage compartment, that's it, that's your lot, just the two, which from a travel point of view might be a bit limiting for some. However, despite these differences, as stated earlier, the Lite shares the same aesthetic overall look and design as its bigger siblings and is made from the same materials. It has the same tarpaulin PVC outer for the main body of the bag, which offers a good deal of weather protection and is easy to clean, though many have complained about its susceptibility to scratching. It's available in a wide range of colours. This is the Wasatch Green, or however you pronounce it, and it has the same more durable PVC base as the other models, on which, as you can see, it can actually stand upright. And as with the larger bags, it also has the same ballistic nylon for the roll top section, which by all accounts doesn't offer as good weather protection as the main section. Therefore, if you're going to be out in the rain for any prolonged period of time, you're probably advised to use an optional outer rain jacket for the bag. It's a shame though that, as I said earlier, there's no dedicated place to store one. As with the larger bags, there's a pocket on this side of the bag for a water bottle and potentially a small tripod. Well, we'll come back to that later. When not needed, it's zipped down to keep things tidy, and when unzipped, there's elasticated material to help keep a hold of whatever you put in here. But it's a relatively small pocket and not that tall. A smaller bottle though will fit in just fine. On this side we have the side access opening for the camera storage area, but no external pocket. There are two sets of zips, each with zip pulls, and these work generally okay and are again weather sealed. On opening the panel, the reverse reveals yet another difference to the larger bags. It loses out on the storage pockets for cards, batteries, etc. that come with those larger bags. Instead, it's covered with the felting material to allow the internal dividers to adhere to the surface. The opening to the bag is naturally small given the size of the bag, but it's still just large enough for me, with a bit of jiggling, to get my largest camera, a Canon R5, in and out, even with an L bracket and filtering on. But obviously it would be a lot easier without them. However, for me personally, I just find it rather cumbersome getting the camera out from this side. I'd much prefer the opening to be on the other side of the bag. I just find it awkward to grasp the camera, and so I end up having to grab the camera along the top and bottom rather than being able to grab it by the grip. But some of that might be down to how I generally have the interior set up, which we shall see later. The Lite also shares the same floppy, oversized shopping bag tote handles as you get with the larger bags, with the same "Wonder More, Worry Less" inscription, and the same ability to fasten them together magnetically. Though, as many before me have criticised, the magnets aren't that strong. One thing I've noticed though is that the magnetic strength is greatest when you fasten the handles together with the lettering facing each other. And in any other combination, the magnetic strength is definitely weaker or virtually non-existent. Personally though, I'm not a big fan of these handles. Whilst many might like to carry the bag like a shopping bag, I much prefer the handles on, say, my old Peak Design everyday backpack, which has handles down each side as well as on the top. Not only does this allow you to carry the bag like a briefcase, it also makes it a lot easier for stowing and grabbing the bag. Another potential issue with the Provoke handles is that those who are a bit shorter than me may end up, at the very least, dragging the harness straps along the ground, or at worst, dragging the base of the bag along the ground, especially when going up and down steps. So, as I said at the start, one of the things that particularly attracted me to this bag was the expandable roll top section, a feature that I found very useful on my Shimoda. With the Provoke, this is secured by the usual large G or S hook, however you want to describe it, that can be fastened through various loops with a strap to tighten it all down. There's also some Velcro fasteners to keep the roll top even more secure, though of course as you unfurl the bag you do get the noise, which means that this operation is anything but stealthy. And this isn't exactly the quickest method of getting into a bag. I sometimes find the hook a little bit of a faff to release from the hoop. You'll also notice that as you unfurl the roll top that it's wider at the top than near the main body of the bag, and that stiffeners on each side of the opening help it keep its shape. But because of these stiffeners, as you roll the top down it sticks out on both sides, which could potentially get in the way at times. However, once inside the top section, I have to say that it's deceptively large, but as it doesn't have any protection like the main section, you have to be careful how you store things in here. So what fits? Well, I can easily fit in here my insulating layer, my waterproof outer layer, my waterproof over trousers, and if I really want to push it, my small mid-weight layer, although things do start to get a little tight with this last item. However, I wouldn't necessarily be looking to carry all of this in the Provoke. The whole idea of this bag for me is to travel lighter, but it does demonstrate the amount of space available in this top section. And for such a small bag, it even gives my Shimoda a run for its money. In the review of that bag, I showed that there was room for all the stuff that I've just shown here within its top section, with only one extra item being added, a small sandwich box. With the Peak Design bag, it's even a struggle to get the waterproof over trousers into the top, let alone a small mid-weight layer. I'd also add that the Provoke looks a little bit neater, packed out than the Peak Design bag does, and it seems more secure and generally better protected from the elements. However, access to the top section of the Peak Design is way simpler and quicker. Now, although the Provoke Lite can accommodate a decent amount of gear, there are a few potential issues if you pack the Lite out too much, especially in the top section. First, it can be a bit difficult to fasten the top back up. You see, you have to let out the strap in order to hook it onto the last loop. But if you're not careful, you might then find there isn't enough of the strap left to grab hold of in order to cinch it all back down again. Second, it can become awkward to use the handles. You may have difficulty grabbing both sets of handles, and the magnets definitely won't hold together with the top packed out. But perhaps the greatest potential issue is that of comfort. And the more you load the bag, especially the top section, the greater is the tendency for the centre of gravity to pull the top away from the body, whilst at the same time pushing the base further into the back. Unfortunately, there aren't any load lifters on the top of the harness to help pull the top back in, which of course isn't uncommon on a bag of this size. But from what I can see, none of the other larger Provokes have this feature either. You do, however, get the usual adjustment straps at the bottom of the harness, which pulls the bag higher up and further into the back. The harness itself has some mesh padding, and whilst not overly thick, it's comfortable for the size of the bag and when used under normal conditions. And I have to say that I prefer this harness over my Peak Designs. There's a removable sternum strap which can help make things a little more comfortable, but there's one or two issues here which I'll come back to shortly. And whilst you could attach an optional waist strap via these anchor points, I personally don't think it'd be much use on a bag of this size, especially if you're tall like me. But there is a decent amount of mesh padding on the back panel with a couple of deep channels to help with airflow. And having now used the bag for a variety of scenarios, I have to say that on the whole, I've not had any significant issues regarding comfort. Most of the time, I've just taken the bag out for 2 or 3 hours with just camera gear whilst carrying my main tripod in my hand. But I've also done a 7-mile family hike, taking 1 camera, 1 lens, mini tripod, food and water, plus an additional layer, as well as the usual bits and bobs, batteries, memory cards and the like. And I've also used it for a full day's landscape shoot where we drove between venues in the Yorkshire Dales and then walked in about a mile or so each time to a specific location whilst carrying my R5 3 lenses plus again the usual bits and bobs. And for some of these locations I was carrying my Peak Design travel tripod on the bag. And it was only when carrying the tripod on the bag that I've actually encountered some issues with slight discomfort. Now, to be honest, given the size of the light, you're only going to be looking at carrying a smaller tripod with it. But even with a smaller tripod, like my Peak Design travel tripod, there's still a problem. And that's because there isn't really anywhere suitable to carry it. As previously mentioned, we have a pocket on this side of the bag for a water bottle and potentially a tripod. But another thing missing from the Lite is a strap across the top here to secure a tripod. The tripod therefore just lolls around in here. There are some workarounds that you can employ, none of which though are perfect, and they generally require you to use additional straps such as Wandrd's own accessory straps or even third-party straps. Whichever version you use though, the ends of the straps just hook through the various anchor points around the bag. There's 2 down each side on the front and there's 4 on the base as well. But there isn't an anchor point on this side above the pocket. And so you can't just attach the strap across here to support a tripod in the side pocket. Well, not easily. With the tripod in the pocket, you can fasten a strap onto the upper front anchor point and wrap it around the top of the tripod, and then hook the other end back into the same anchor point. This sort of works, but I found that the tripod wasn't very secure as it tended to move around and gravitated towards the front, which over time caused a little discomfort on my shoulders. Another method, utilising the side pocket, is to open the bag up and use an anchor point on the inside edge. Now, this anchor point, together with the 2 at the top and 1 along the other side, are primarily there to attach accessory straps to prevent the back panel opening too wide. Some also claim that they can be used to allow you to access your camera gear whilst hanging the bag in front of you without having to put the bag down on the ground. I haven't yet used this feature in anger other than for this demonstration, and I'm not sure how robust it would be. However, using the loop at this side, you can then hook one end of the accessory strap through it and the other end into the loop at the upper front of the bag. You'll then have a strap across the side of the bag like normal in order to secure your tripod. However, it does mean that the strap will block the zip, and you'll then have a gap when you fasten the 2 zips up to meet the strap. This works in a fashion and is more secure than hooking the strap into the same anchor point as before, but it isn't an ideal option to use, especially if you're in a wet or dusty environment. Alternatively, you can use a bungee cord and loop it through the front anchor point and around the rear handle. Another method is to fasten the straps to the base of the bag and carry the tripod there. However, for me, this isn't an ideal location for a tripod. Every time you put your bag down, you'd be resting it on the tripod, and of course, dependent upon the size of the tripod, it might just then stick out at the sides. And finally, of course, you can fasten the straps across the front of the bag and pass 2 of the tripod legs behind them. Now, with my more traditional tripod, this wallows around slightly using this method, but with the Peak Design tripod, you can close the legs very close together so that they actually clasp onto the straps quite tightly. And this is the method that I found to be the most comfortable, well, for this tripod at least. So, getting back to the harness. This is actually attached to the back panel itself rather than to the top of the bag, which means that it doesn't get in the way of the zips when you want to get into the bag. It has the same hoops and loops as you find on the bigger bags, which allow you to attach carabiners and other accessories. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a single piece removable sternum strap. You clip the ends onto the plastic rail, one on each side of the harness, and in order to remove it, you then just tug at the cord. If you don't want to use the strap, you can either clip both ends onto the same side or remove it altogether. For me though, I find the sternum strap system to be one of the weaker aspects of the bag. And that's because once you've clipped the end onto the rail, you can't slide it up and down. It's locked into position, which for some might actually be a positive. But trying to get it positioned at the right place on each side at the same level can be a bit tricky at times. It requires you to remove and reattach the ends until you're satisfied. I've also seen comments from others who've lost the strap due to it popping off. And so let's get into the guts of the bag and open up the back panel. As we've already seen, this has two zips with these large zip pulls, and again the zips are weather sealed. The back panel opens in the traditional clamshell style and opens fully without springing back. And although the harness doesn't get in the way when undoing the zips, the tote handles sometimes do, especially the rear one when closing the bag up. It sometimes gets trapped inside the bag. On the reverse of the back panel, there's a laptop sleeve which will take up to a 14-inch laptop. Another absence though with the Lite compared to the bigger Prvke bags is a separate sleeve to carry a tablet in addition to a laptop. Now, given what I mentioned earlier about comfort, I'm not sure that I'd want to carry the bag too long with the extra weight of the laptop plus camera gear, let alone carrying an additional tablet. Thankfully, the only times I'm likely to carry a laptop is when I travel, which I haven't yet done so with this bag. And once I get to my destination, I'll be leaving my laptop in the accommodation whilst I go out shooting or sightseeing. Moving down the inside of the back panel, there are three zip storage compartments. These two smaller ones and this one that runs the full width. Unfortunately, you can't readily see what's in them without unzipping them. And they're all fairly shallow, about 8 centimeters. However, they do have a slight gusset on their base which allows for some expansion for bulkier items. I use the smaller ones for my camera remotes and the larger one for my battery and card wallets. As a reference, the smaller ones will take a 77mm lens cap. Now, as I've already mentioned, the Lite doesn't use a separate camera cube as the larger bags do. The camera storage is built into the main body of the bag, and to facilitate this, there is a reasonable amount of additional padding and protection around the sides and the front of the bag. Another difference with the larger bags is that the internal colour is matched to that of the exterior colour, whereas with the bigger bags, the interior colour is black, all black, including the camera cubes, which I have to say is one of the things that's always put me off the Prvke bags. But of course, that's all a personal preference, and if black is your preference, then the Lite still has you covered. If you opt for the black outer colour for the bag, you'll get a black interior. And if you want an even lighter colour to mine, then go for a lighter exterior colour. The depth of the camera storage area is naturally a little shallow, at about 10 centimeters or so, but there is a degree of tolerance, especially if you don't have a laptop in the sleeve. Out of the box, the main camera storage area is configured in a fairly traditional layout with one central section going widthways, facilitated by these two large L-shaped dividers, with a few smaller sections dotted around, aided by three smaller dividers. All the dividers have folds in them to help you bend and manipulate them, and they're fairly thick, a lot thicker than I would prefer, especially when compared to my other bags. But you do get these three elastic straps to help secure gear as well. Now, this standard layout is the same as you'd get with the Essentials camera cube, which is the cube that fits into the comparable lower section of the Prvke 21. And even though the 21 is the larger bag, the space afforded by the Essentials camera cube is actually slightly less than that available within the camera section of the Lite. And that's because the thickness of the cube walls themselves take up some space. Above the camera storage area, we have the zipped access panel through to the upper compartment. And this has the same quick access provision as the larger bags by just pulling on these tabs. It's a shame though that there aren't any zip pulls on these zips, as it would make it a lot easier to close the panel back up. But that's easily remedied by using third-party zip pulls if needed. One thing to be aware of is that this zip panel is actually the fleece lined compartment that's accessible from the top of the bag, and so whatever you put in there will potentially have some impact on how easy it is to manipulate the flap. Dividing the upper and lower sections of the bag is a shelf held in place on three sides by Velcro. One of the downsides of this is that there are gaps at the ends, which means that if you have any small loose items in the top, they'll more than likely find their way down into the lower section. However, the benefit of this panel is that it can be lowered out of the way. If you take out all the dividers, you can secure the shelf to the floor of the main camera compartment using the Velcro tab, which then provides a top to bottom full-size space similar to using the larger Prvkes without a camera cube in place. Okay, so there are many different ways that you can set this bag up to suit your own needs. But there are a couple of negatives. First, as I mentioned earlier, there are only two sizes of dividers. And this limits your flexibility a little bit. You may find that you just don't have a divider that's of the right length to fill a gap. You can of course link dividers together using their Velcro tabs, as they're all covered with this felty type material. But this brings me to the second issue. Whilst all the dividers have Velcro tabs at each end, only the long dividers have Velcro tabs on their base, which means if you do string shorter ones together or add them to the longer ones, they're likely to flop about if you make things too long. So let's go through a few different layouts. First off, using the default setup as it comes out of the box. I'm going to be using my Canon R8, which has a 3-legged thing L bracket attached along with the RF 24-240 lens. And this fits nicely in here with the camera sitting well beneath the zip. The RF 14-35 f4 with lens hood reversed fits in here. But things are quite tight, and you can see that the dividing shelf to the upper section is being pushed out a little bit. If I remove the lens hood, then it fits a lot easier, and if I need the hood, then I could easily just store it into the upper section. Moving around, in here goes the RF 35 1.8 with lens hood reversed, here the RF 16mm 2.8, and here the RF 28 2.8, and finally the RF 50mm 1.8 with lens hood reversed. There's a bit of wasted space at the sides of the camera, but these can easily be filled in with lens cloths or whatever. So yes, a bit tight in places, but if I rejig the dividers from the default setup, I can actually get the same gear in, but a little bit easier. By way of interest, prior to getting this bag, I went to Prague a few months ago taking with me the Peak Design bag, and with the exception of the 35mm lens, I took the exact same gear as I've just shown. I needed the fast primes for nighttime handheld and interior shots that I anticipated shooting, but there just wasn't anywhere to fit the 35mm lens. And that's because the Peak Design bag doesn't store smaller items very well. I needed to put the smaller lenses into pouches to protect them and to stop them rolling around, which obviously takes up a little bit more space. Anyhow, back to the Prvke Lite. Having used it for a while now, I've mainly settled on this layout, using only one of the larger dividers like this, with the camera space along the base of the bag. For this layout, the larger divider falls a bit short, and so I've extended it by attaching one of the shorter ones to it. So this time I'm using my Canon R5 with the RF 24-105 lens, and again I have an L bracket attached to the camera. The R5 naturally sits a little higher than the R8, but even with the L bracket it still sits just beneath the zip. It would also fit in the space from the previous default layout. In this space goes my RF 14-35 f4 with lens hood reversed, and in this slot goes my 100-400 f5.6 to f8, again with its lens hood reversed. And as for accessories such as my zippered accessory pouch and filters, well, these can go into the upper section accessible through the rear zip panel. And this is more or less typically what I would take for a landscape shoot. As an alternative to the 100-400, I could easily fit my RF 70-200 f2.8 with lens hood reversed together with its tripod collar. And if I was travelling and wanted to carry a laptop in the sleeve, then it's no problem to close the back panel with this configuration. But sometimes I might want to carry two cameras. Again, I have the R5 with an L bracket and the 24-105 lens attached, and if I stand the 14-35 lens on its end, I can now actually fit my R8 with its L bracket into this slot with the 100-400 lens attached. But as you can see, the top of the 14-35 protrudes slightly over the zip. Now, without carrying a laptop, the back panel closes just fine. But with a laptop in the sleeve, whilst the back panel still closes, it's a little tight. And whilst I might be okay with this for a short period, I'm not sure how it would work out long term. Now this loadout is the setup that I typically use for a school performance or dance festival that I shoot. I have the R5 with the EF24 to 70 2.8 plus the R8 with the RF 70 to 200 2.8. Both lenses have their hoods reversed, and I have the RF 14 to 35 f4 stood upright. I wouldn't have a laptop with me for these shoots. And again, any ancillaries go into the top section. And of course, if you'd rather prioritise access to lenses from the side access opening, then you can reconfigure the dividers to something like this. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, you can move the dividing shelf between the upper and lower sections out of the way and secure it with the Velcro tab. Unfortunately, you won't be able to attach dividers to the reverse side of the now flat shelf due to its smooth surface. But I can still set it up to get my R5 attached with the RF 24 to 105 and the 14 to 35 lens stood upright. And there's then plenty of space going all the way up to the upper section for whatever else you might want to carry. But if you lay the shelf panel the other way into the upper section itself, you can then use the full set of dividers if needed. Unfortunately, the other three sides of the shelf panel won't be secured as there's nothing in the upper section to secure them to. But I don't think this is much of a problem really, especially when you start loading gear in. And because the side of the shelf that's now facing up has the felty material showing, you can actually extend the dividers higher up into the top section if needed. And this gives you the option to configure the space to carry a longer item that might extend from the lower section through into the upper section, maybe a long lens, a gimbal, or as in this case, a small tripod, my Peak Design travel tripod. And in this configuration, there's also plenty of room for either my R5 or R8 with the 24-105 or 24-240 attached, plus the 14-35 and an additional lens, in this case the RF 35 1.8. And this for me would be a great layout for an urban shoot where I might not necessarily want to advertise that I'm carrying photo gear by having the tripod on the exterior of the bag. Now I'm sure there are many other combinations and setups that could be applied, and of course your kit and needs are likely to be different to my own, but please don't ask me if X, Y or Z piece of kit will fit. You've seen what I can fit in here, and the measurements of the gear that I use are freely available online for you to then compare to your own. But hopefully I've given you a flavour of what can be accommodated. So what are my final thoughts then on the Wandrd Prvke Lite? Who's it for? Who should buy it? Well, without doubt, the Prvke Lite is a great bag. It's small, lightweight, stylish, made to a high standard, though commanding a premium price. It's more suited to those occasions when you're travelling lighter, or if carrying a little bit more, then not necessarily travelling too far or for too long. It's also suited to those who are more content with a more minimalist approach, rather than having a bag that has tons of nooks and crannies for storing all sorts of small items, which suits me just fine. I find having small items in too many pockets becomes problematic when I want to swap bags over. And whilst this bag is primarily focused at photographers, with its built-in camera storage, it can also be used as an everyday backpack just by stripping out the dividers. However, those seeking to swap regularly between these two rolls might be better off with other options, such as the Prvke 21, which, with its separate camera cube, makes it easier and quicker to swap between the two rolls. And the Prvke 21 is both larger and has more features than the Lite. However, the Prvke 21's additional overall weight is weight that I'd rather use for gear rather than carrying just dead weight. And if using the Essentials camera cube, it actually has less camera storage space than the Lite. And so, if you're like me and you're a photographer looking for one of the smallest, lightest camera backpacks there is, and you're happy with a fairly minimalist approach, then the Lite is certainly worth considering. And for me personally, as I said earlier in the video, the Lite is probably my Goldilocks bag. Not only is it small enough to be accepted as a personal item by some airlines, it also still provides flexibility and versatility to carry a decent amount of gear in a variety of configurations when required. And provided you don't go mad and overload the bag whilst carrying it for too long a period, it's more than comfortable enough. And going forward, I can see the Prvke Lite probably servicing about 60 to 70% of my photography carry needs. Well, that's it. Thank you for sticking through this long video to the end. I hope it's been of use to some of you. Until next time, take care, TTFN, ta-ta for now.